Hi there, welcome to Boxing Deep Dive. I'm Lyndon Hosking and this is Classic Fights, and I'm really excited about this one because this is an all Aussie fight tonight. I'm going to quickly bring in my co-hosts. We've got Peter Maniatis and Mike Altamura. How are we there, guys?
Great to be on the show, guys.
And
I'm depressed
You're depressed? Why is that?
because you picked the downfall of my hero this week.
Well, he was mine at the time too, mate. But we've got no Tassie this episode, so we'll. But I'm sure we'll get a fair bit anyway. But I'm really excited about this fight because I'm sure we've all got our own background stories behind this one. I just remember, with this fight, I think I just turned 12 years old 2 weeks prior to this fight. It was July 12. 1985. I speak, of course, of Barry Michael, Lester Ellis, of course. I didn't actually mention the fight. So, but as I said, I just turned 12 years old. Like you, Mike, massive Lester Ellis fan. Back at the start of the year, being an 11-year-old, watching him beat One Kill You back in February at the Town Hall. He just seemed like Superman to me. And then, of course, the fight with Rod Sequenin, where he almost was gone in the second round and came back and stopped him in the 13th. And my highlight of all that was that the Easter, the Good Friday appeal. I called in as an 11-year-old and donated my $5 and actually got to speak to Lester Ellis. And from that day, I was forever a Lester Ellis fan because he was so good on the phone and took time to talk. It was awesome. So Barry Michael wasn't very popular in my household for quite some time after this. What do you remember about it, Pete?
Look, I remember at the time I had a neighbour that was a big boxing fan and he lived about 8 doors down, Stuart Bussey. And he was a massive Barry Michael fan and I was a big Lester Ellis fan, and I used to get X amount of money for your lollies and stuff back then and your keep and all that. And I was always having a punt, so I put my whole weekly allowance onto Leicester. So as a young kid, can you imagine how I felt after the result? But it didn't matter to me. But it was just that boxing was different back then. It was just a capitalised. It was on the front page of the papers. It wasn't on the back page. It was on the news. It was live. It was here. It was there.
It was like media.
It was like AFL football now. You know how you get it front page centre. That's how boxing was. So. Yeah. Growing up, the impact and the build-up to that fight was just what boxing's all about, and it was amazing.
Yeah, and Mike, I'm not sure you're even born then, but I mean, I'm sure you've watched the fight 100 times since then. But obviously, to this day, you've still got a connection to the Ellis name.
Yeah, of course. So my dad was part of state teams early days that we involved in taking Lester Ellis, a very young 12, 13-year-old Lester Ellis, interstate. So that's where the family connection is. And also, my connection to Lester, like you said, is deep. I actually did all the rewrites of his biopic about 8 years ago. So a big part of that, going through all of his archives, going through all old fight footage, programs, things of that nature. And I'll take you through the fight program of this bout in a second. Yep. But one of the interesting things was actually in Lester's home collection, there's probably about 5 sparring sessions with Barry all the way through from Lester being about a 14-year-old kid through to him being 18. And I know that, and Peter... Yeah, that's right. I mean, this footage would be from memory when Lester was just 18, early pro career. And I know that Pete would know this well, that there's a lot of talk that the last time they sparred that Lester had handled Barry comfortably. And that's what gave the camp a lot of confidence that, when Barry was challenging him for the World Championship, that Lester would be ready at 19 years of age. But when I watched a lot of this footage back, not just with Barry, but also with the great Paul Ferrari, who was very clever infighter, catching, slipping shots, parrying, I seen Lester getting frustrated and overshooting and trying to punch too hard with Barry. And you see here, Barry forcing Lester to carry his body weight a lot of the time. And so it was a great contrast of styles in that Barry had all the nous and all the skill and expertise, but a lot of people in the game felt that Lester would be catching him at the right time. Lester was a young lion, he's a world champion, and usually the guy who's a world champion is more experienced than the challenger, but this was one of those situations that was an absolute contrast.
Yeah, it was. And looking at that, I mean, the footage there. I'm assuming Barry would have been a couple of divisions above Leicester back then. You could just see the size, but geez, it just brings back some memories. And I mean, a bit of background on the fight. Obviously, July 12th, 1985, Festival Hall in Melbourne. We'll bring up our little shot of the guys here. It's hard to believe it was 36 years ago, because I remember it like it was yesterday. But the IBF Junior Lightweight title, Festival Hall, Melbourne, the home of boxing back in the day. And Pete, I mean, back then it was like you said, it was all the news, it was all over the papers, and that's no internet, no social media, no nothing. It was all word of mouth. It sold out in 2 seconds flash, and the fact that it was that perfect storm of the guys. Our two Melbourne boys. You had Lester with the sort of the Carlton crew, and you had Barry with the Painters and Dockers. It was all just conducive to a massive build up, and obviously an electric atmosphere on the night.
Yeah, it was. And you also had the trainers. I mean, Barry Michael brought Dana Goodson
That's right.
to Australia, and then Dana Goodson went on to train Leicester. But there was a lot of, what's that word? Training camps never go like everyone pretends to get on during the thing, but then after you leave, you'd say he's not doing that well, or he's not. I know a young Keith Ellis Jr., who I think was probably one of the best trainers in boxing minds. And Keith and I became great friends. And that through that, I sort of got to hang out with Lester a lot, especially just before the Mundine fight. But just some of the things that Keith thought they should do and Dana wanted to do. And Keith was only in his mid-20s back then as well. We're talking about a young team here.
Yeah.
It wasn't as if they were all experienced people. They were learning on the job, and they had a Ferrari with P plates. That's what it all boiled down to.
That he was 19, about to turn. I think he just turned 20 before this fight. Amazing.
Yeah, and he'd only been a professional for 2 years and only had 16 professional fights. Yeah. So let's get into perspective. He was a young kid, but they had, you had Coscito, who's a successful businessman, a great guy, a guy that I got to know. He's a very nice person. You had Alphonse behind the scenes. I know Paul Ferrari trained Lester early in his career. Paul's was a real good friend of mine, a family friend. So, I mean, I got to interact and get to see a lot. And look, we're not mentioning Barry. Barry's a great guy, and I've spent many adventures with Barry. But it was one of those colourful moments where you bring two big personalities into town, and they're both from Melbourne. And it was just something that if you lived through it and you were part of it, you were 12, you said, Lyndon, so I mean that must have been massive for you. And I could just remember counting the days for this fight to happen, and I didn't really know the sport that well. I thought Lester was just going to teach him a lesson, but when you look at it, Barry was having his 54th professional fight and been there and done that, and I mean Lester's fighting 15 rounds up against a real seasoned world-class fighter. So it was interesting at the time.
Well, it was funny, wasn't it? Mike, because with this one, Barry was almost a forgotten man, wasn't he? Because Lester was the modern day sort of matinee idol, and as a superstar, he was all over the news, and it was the Rocky story, living out in sunshine. And Barry was the ultimate villain, wasn't he? And I must admit, I didn't know a lot about Barry at the time. Obviously, just turning 12 years old. It was all about Lester, but Barry was definitely the cowboy with the black hat on, wasn't he?
Barry was an absolute road warrior. Everything that he accomplished in his career, he had to accomplish the hard way. He travelled the world. He travelled throughout South America, travelled throughout Asia, been robbed a number of times on the road. And even though he was viewed as, what was he in this fight? Was he 30? Just 30. Turned 30, was it?
30, yeah.
Just turned 30, but he was considered like a prehistoric 30. The context that a lot of people missed with Barry was that he had only lost one bout the previous 6 years. And if you knew the full story of that loss, which was to Claude Noel for the Commonwealth lightweight title, you know that Barry went through the stress of trying to promote the show himself, was overwhelmed with all kinds of responsibilities, and probably didn't perform to expectation. But if you look at his form line leading into Leicester, he had defeated Frank Ropus, classic fight, Ash Wednesday War, had beat Graham Porky Brook for the Commonwealth title, 135 pounds. Porky had beaten Claude Noel, who had previously beaten Barry. So Barry's form line over those 6 years was extremely solid. You throw in then, of course, that classic war in 1981 with our earthquake Carter. The question mark going into this fight on Barry's side was he hadn't made 130 pounds since 1976. So first time in 9 years, how was Barry's body? When you get older, you're supposed to be going up in weight. You're not supposed to be reducing. So a lot of people felt that Barry might be sapped at the weight. And that was a question mark going in, was how is he going to handle the early pressure, the body shots of Lester? But in terms of Barry's animosity towards the sport, and you go back and listen to the interviews, and the man's got a chip on his shoulder, but I think rightfully so, because in a very quiet time in Australian boxing history, say from the mid-70s through to about 83, 84, and people know this well, essentially it was Tony Mundine, Barry and Paul Ferrari were really three of the stalwarts of Australian boxing. There was other guys here or there, but Barry was a consistent across that time and never really received the respect. He never, there's that famous story that he was in calculations to fight Ray Boom Boom Mancini for the lightweight world title, and then after Dave Wolf, the manager of Ray Mancini, watched the video of Barry against Earthquake Carter in 81, a line went through Barry's name. So this was him coming to get his, and he was going to come with a lot of animosity. And like I said, that chip on the shoulder, which naturally cast Barry as a villain in this fight.
Yeah, and it was a big talking point during the build-up, wasn't it, Pete? It was the Barry was the no respect sort of thing, and Mike's right. He was one of those fighters. It was just too good for his own good, I suppose. That the really top line fighters didn't want to fight him, but he really resented the fact that he didn't get that respect from the Australian public, didn't he? And Lester was the new superstar, and he was getting it all, and that the build up of that was quite was massive. Alongside obviously the debate about whether he would actually make the weight.
Yeah, look, it was an interesting time, and also when you go and look at Lester, he wins the world title Feb 85. Then he's got Sequilin a few months later. Then he's got Barry. So within 3 or 4 months, he's making his second defence. So I think that year he fought 5 or 6 times.
Yeah.
And I remember Lester telling me a story. After he beat Rod Sequilin, they took him to an establishment. Not Rod Sequilin, Kilquan Yu. They took him to a nice massage establishment down Dudley Street after the fight. Our Korean friend, and Lester and Keith used to go to a place. It's still there now. It's in Spencer Street. It's a taxi place. Makes the best hamburgers, best pasta, right at the back of Festival Hall. It's a 24/7 taxi embassy place. Spent many a night with Lester and Keith back there drawing out promotions. But getting back there, they're all there. And Lester's dad said, "Come on, we've got to go. I've got to go to work tomorrow." And Lester turned around and he said, "Dad, I just won the world title." And his dad goes, "Yeah, but because his dad, Lester said he never missed a day of work. He's just one of those working guys." And Lester said, "Dad, have a look into the sky." And he goes, "Yeah, what?" He goes, "See how far you can see? I'm the champion of the world. You're not going to work tomorrow. So you're taking a day off." And spoke to his dad to take a day off. So you could see the build-up of a young kid having all these life changes, and he's just starting to make the money and the respect that, for a 20-year-old kid coming from the western suburbs, and now he's got Barry Michael in front of him that early in such a big build-up fight, and you've got, Painters and Dockers, you've got the Carlton crew as well, and there's just so much rumblings in between everything. It was just a big burden to have for Lester on his shoulders, for my opinion anyway. And mate, I thought Lester fought his heart out. I really
he did. We'll watch the highlights of that in a second there, but Mike, it was and Mike, Pete's right. The burden that he carried, and I suppose in hindsight, it's a wonderful thing. But I suppose with that hindsight, it was probably too early to take Barry on, and Barry obviously knew that.
I always look at it like this, even when you're analysing history. People lie, but the facts never do. Lester had competed going into the fight with Barry. Lester had competed in 70 rounds the previous 12 months. Nothing scheduled less than 10 rounds. Even the fight with Richard Fowler, which is a forgotten fight, TKO 10, he suffered a flash knockdown in that fight. That was a tough, bruising fight. The fight with Sashula is the kind of fight that these days you're taking 6 months off. Instead, 3 months later, he's fighting for the world title. The fight with Kwang Kil Yu You
15
remember
rounds.
he didn't get hit a lot, but his left foot was blistered, so severely blistered to the extent that he wasn't able to really do much. No shadow boxing, nothing for about 3 weeks. Then he's backed up, within 8 weeks, fought Sequenin. The first 2-3 rounds of that fight is enough to give him another 6 months off.
Yeah.
And yet he's back up again. And sometimes people say when a kid's young and youthful, they can bounce back. But I think that just reflects how novice the team were at the time. And, like I said, hindsight's 2020. But I think if you look at the facts, you can see that it was probably time just to pump the brakes a bit, give him a bit more time. Barry's a fight, he needed a nice rest before he would be ready, take a lot of the emotion. And to the fact that Peter said earlier about the team being at a clash, I'm only going off what the late Keith Sr. said, and both of them have passed away, so it's hard to know. Keith Jr., sorry, but this Keith Ellis Jr. said that he wanted Lester tactically to be on his toes, to box and move in the fight. Dana Goodson wanted Lester to press Barry and break him, to go hard to the body, hard to the head, combination punching, frenetic punching. So if you just look at those two different ideologies in camp, you can see why there might have been a bit of dissension in the ranks in his preparation too.
Yeah, no, correct. Well, going into the fight, Lester was, like you said, Pete, 16-0. Only been a pro for 2 years. Barry, 44-8-3, been a pro for a long time. And as I said, it's hard to believe that, you've got a kid who just turned 20 years old, taking on someone like Barry Michael, even though it was the world title fight. But, I mean, this is the days, obviously, modern boxing fans will think Mundine Green or Horn and Zoo. Back then, it was definitely Lester Ellis versus Barry Michael, wasn't it, Pete?
Yeah, it was. And look, this fight was kind of egged on by a sparring session previously. Keith Ellis Jr. told me that they went to spar Barry, but Barry had having a lot of time off, and he came back in, and Barry, knowing Barry was probably out on the turbs over the weekend because he used to love getting out to nightclubs, and he wouldn't spar well on a Monday, and he'd be right by Thursday. But this spar, as Barry would be the first to say, he got flogged in a spar. So they went away saying, mate, Lester's become this big superstar. Barry's an aging veteran. We'll take him and we'll make the money. You just saw what happened. And so that flogging that maybe Barry's smart enough to have let that happen, knowing he's going to get the fight as well. Because, I remember talking to Keith in the old days, said, mate, if you've got a guy at 6 knockouts and no one wants to fight him, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll just get a complete bum that everyone's knocking out, and this 6-0 guy goes the distance with him. Then they'll be coming out of the woodwork to get a fight. Like, he'd plant little traps like that, and that's how Keith was. Yeah. He wasn't your conventional guy. The guy was actually a genius. You only had to be around him for 5 minutes to pick stuff up, watching fights. He just, he's like a Customato of Australian boxing. And it was just a shame that if we had had Keith at 45 and Lester at 20, Lester maybe would have won 3 or 4 world titles in 3 different weight classes. It just didn't happen. Keith was a novice at the time, and he was trying to find his way as well, because Keith wanted to be a fighter and his dad wouldn't let him fight. So Keith had to smuggle out and tell his dad he's going somewhere, and bought boots and had one amateur fight and got beat. And because his dad wouldn't let him fight. So he was going through his own personal issues as well, growing up, and he was only in his young 20s to be handling a Ferrari when you're not really sure of yourself as well, because you're only a novice. Everyone starts as a novice. So that was the thing. We had 2 brilliant fighters. It was just wrong timing. We had an experienced Keith and a young Lester. They both would have been multi-millionaires.
All right, well, let's get into the fight itself. It's about a 15-minute video, but there's so much to cover in this fight. It's a little bit like our fight with Harding and Andrews last week. It was hard to find, to edit down the highlights, because pretty much the whole fight was set at an unbelievable pace. And to think that these guys went that hard for 15 rounds, it was amazing. So let's get into it. I think you remember here, Mike, did Lester make Barry wait like 15 minutes in between getting in the ring and before he came?
Yep.
Yeah. Yep. Oh, that became a future trick of Keith's throughout the years as well.
Yeah, that was one of Keith's.
yeah, the Master Blaster, he was just one of a kind, wasn't he? But look at Barry, he knew, and even then you can see him talking to him, just getting in his head. He was the master.
Yeah, Barry said, I didn't care if I have to wait the whole night. I'm going to wait. That was Barry's motto. Look at Howard.
Yeah, he looks
that's a very fresh Howard Lee, one of our great ring announcers in Australian
history. He was
history.
the man back in the day, wasn't he?
Oh, he was the best. He was the absolute best.
He actually named Lester the Master Blaster, didn't he?
Yeah, he used to give everyone a nickname.
One of the best nicknames ever, the Master Blaster.
There's Gus.
Yeah. I still remember ABC TV. Probably the last fight they actually did.
Look how look how punchable Barry's head is there. Yeah. Like that, and that's what plays into his greatness. He knew how to trigger his opponents.
Yeah, he did. And he's still doing it to this day.
Yep.
Just super fast, wasn't he, Lester? Like lightning.
And fast combinations as well. Like fast shooting from the outside, backing up, coming forward at all levels, and then would explode like that. Like that's a lot to absorb there. You see Barry with the cross-arm defense, but still catching them on the shoulders must hurt. Catching them on the elbows must hurt.
And it's funny too, like Lester's probably got all the highlights in his reel, like the lightning fast punches. Barry's just the same way the whole through, just grinding it down, grinding him down the whole way. Do you think he's played into his hand a bit, Barry's hands a bit here, Pete, with Lester trying to sort of take him out?
Look, the build-up and just the whole thing with the crowd and that, I guess they both would have just been, the adrenaline would have been going 100 miles an hour. And I know Lester hurt him early in the fight. And even Barry said, I was hurt, but Barry kept saying, is that the best you got? To try and bluff him. And Lester thought I didn't want to punch myself out, but that was probably Lester's moment to go for it. But he didn't.
Yeah, well, I think it'll come up in a second. I think, Barry's actually said that I don't think Lester actually knew how hurt that he had him at that time because he was gone. You can see him when he gets hit. He's trying to hang on for dear life.
But he was telling him, is that the best you got? So he's always talking to him.
Yeah.
See Barry as well. Keep just nullifying him on the inside, holding, pushing him back, forcing Lester to carry his weight, which that wears you out by the time you get to round 7, 8, 9.
Yeah. Especially with the pace this fight was fought at. I mean, every round was the same.
Look how adept Barry is at slipping, though. Like he waits, anticipates, and then as soon as he catches those shots, he explodes with his own attacks.
But in all honesty, these two would have had so much fun in there fighting each other because they knew each other that well and there was that much respect and just the build-up. That this is what boxing's all about because you can just see both of them putting 100% and they're enjoying every single moment of it. They wouldn't have it any other way.
Yeah,
while
absolutely.
They're in, obviously, obviously you didn't want if you're Lesser, you would have wanted to wait a bit longer. But while he's in there, you can just see they're both enjoying it.
You can see though Barry's getting his rhythm down to Lester's punches. They're not coming as fast and snappy at this stage.
That was the stage there where Barry was hurt.
Yeah.
Just those punches. But he sort of went away from the game plan, didn't he? Because Barry sort of fought a little bit like One Kill You and Roger Quinn in the size and I suppose the speed. But Lester fought him differently, and that's probably what I was saying about the emotion getting the best of him. Because with Kill You and Sequinin, he really kept his distance and tried to get his range. With Barry, it was just a collision, wasn't it?
Yeah, I've got two differing thoughts, and one of them's heartbreaking because I think it's always been easy just to analyse that if it was anyone other than Barry, Lester would have had his number, and you just think that he held him in such reverence. But Barry did a lot of real clever little movements and little tricks to draw offense out of you. You know, he would shuffle in, look to draw a shot, and then explode. Like, see there, he's suckering him in to throw an uppercut. So you got to give Barry a lot of credit for how deceptively intelligent he was with his defense.
Yeah. I just think he fought the perfect fight. I think it was just an unbelievable performance from him. He was so focused, so conditioned, just mentally, physically. It was just a great performance.
What a great body puncher Barry is.
Oh, amazing.
Great body puncher.
As you were watching it at the time, because I only watched the post-fact, but as you're watching it at the time, did it feel like a close fight, or did it feel like Barry was taking over?
I thought the first 5 rounds, it definitely felt like it was close. But then, when Lester was more sort of 1-punch, 2-punch sort of clinch, you could just tell that Barry had taken the toll. Like you said, Mike, the leaning on him, the tying up his hands in close, the ripping inside with those cheeky little shots. He just fought the perfect fight. I don't know whether it was Barry himself that come up with the game plan or the corner. It was probably a combination of both, but he did not put a foot wrong in this fight, did he, Pete? I just remember barracking for Leicester, and after about 7 or 8 rounds, I thought, yeah, this is probably not going to be our night.
Yeah, look, I think up to the 10th round, it was still tossing up for me, and then after that, I could see that Leicester was waning and Barry was just starting to, he wasn't coming over the top, but he was just keeping that momentum up and winning the rounds. And then you basically knew Leicester's going to need a knockout. And then my thoughts were, where's this knockout going to come from? It's so different to the 2020 cricket where they need sixes, but they're bowling Yorkers, and you're thinking, well, where's the 6 going to come? There's no balls here we're going to hit for 6. And Barry was just so smart.
Well, Barry obviously had an iron chin as well, didn't he? It's very hard to hurt him.
We'd never been off his feet.
Oh, did he ever actually get knocked down? Did Lockridge knock him down or no?
Yeah, Barry's just mugging him in there at this stage. But you can see Leicester still trying to dig in hard and land that shot out of left field.
Well, just the conditioning of both of them. I mean, I'm not sure exactly what round this is, but just the both of them. I mean, even though like Barry was, he fought almost like Mexicans do, where they just go through the gears and they just get better and better and better. It was just a great fight. Leicester, but probably not the greatest game plan, but still the heart and the condition that he showed was just amazing for someone that just turned 20 years old. He's still trying to bomb him out, Pete.
Yeah, it's just one of the classic fights of Australian boxing, and it's good that they fought each other anyway. I mean, so much stuff now in today's boxing. No one wants to fight anyone. These guys just go, bang, we're going to fight each other, and we'll worry about the wreckage afterwards, and we'll give the fans what they want.
Yeah, it's a good point.
So they both from the western suburbs, both know each other well, and they're both going to make money. We'll make money, and whatever happens, happens. Too bad the rematch didn't happen. That would have been interesting.
Well, they held the press conference, didn't they, Mike? They actually sat down for the conference, and it just never happened.
Yeah, and the discussion was it was supposed to be at lightweight, right?
I think it was.
That's how I recall it. Because Leicester was after this, Leicester was never going to make 130 again. But as a side, maybe one act of revenge. So you guys know Lester is into his breeding of animals, of birds, of reptiles, etc. He had a pair of Major Mitchells, and he taught the Major Mitchells how to slander Barry. So for years I've been saying, fuck Barry, fuck Barry.
I think he had a dog too, didn't he, called Shakula, that he used to kick around. I think it was also a rumour.
Yeah, I think that there's a bit of fact to that.
Just the pace of this fight, though, it's just amazing to think that I think we're in about around 13 or something here, that 12 or 13, and the pace that they're setting is just ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, you're filled with admiration for Barry because he really, his whole career had to win fights on percentages. He had a very low knockout record, but he was physically tough and hit hard enough to hold you off, but really had to be a workhorse, which even if he wasn't working with punch output, he was catching, rolling, mugging, this kind of stuff. You know, he was, like I said, just a severely underrated fighter because he's not the kind of guy that had highlight reel after highlight reel.
No. And that's what I said earlier, even with this, it's just his was just a constant grinding down of Leicester. Leicester had all the highlights with the flashy punches, but Barry just did not alter. He just went through the gears 1 through 5 by the end of it and just did what he had to do. It was just a perfect fight. And he never stopped talking the whole way through, did he, Pete?
No. Perfect game plan from Barry. Just that was his opportunity to make big money, and he took it. And good on him. He
what
made a
they
few
actually made,
successful.
Pete? Was it actually released?
I think Leicester would have made close to 100 grand.
Okay.
I don't know what Barry made.
Half that,
Leicester, yeah, I think Leicester was on 100, which back then in '85, I mean,
big money.
you could buy a house in Yarraville or Seddon or somewhere.
Yeah.
That would have been a rattle of $1 million payday today, I guess.
Yeah.
See Leicester desperately trying to land that knockout shot.
It's good to see actually that
Did
after this fight that the respect that they probably earn. I know that was pretty spiteful at the time, but these days at least they're sort of at peace. But I'm sure it still grinds Leicester a little bit. But yeah, it's good to see they've actually got a relationship these days.
Yeah, I think that especially Leicester's temperament, he might have despised Barry leading into this, but he always looked up to him with admiration.
Yeah.
These last 3 rounds are going to be pretty furious. Beautiful uppercut by Lester Ellis, and I think Barry Michael felt that.
Joe Bugner commentating, Aussie Joe.
From the ABC. The commentary in this one was really good. I think they had almost a football feel. Tim Lane was one of the commentators as well.
Yeah.
I don't think there was many fights after this that was on the ABC. I think Barry might have fought Jinsik Choi on after this, and I think that was about it. I think there was nothing after that on ABC.
This is the part of the fight where when you're supporting Leicester, your heart starts to sink.
Yeah, I think it's you sort of know by now that it's not going to happen for Leicester. But Jizzy showed some heart though. Some real heart. Yeah,
without question, because he was dog tired after about 6-7 rounds.
Yeah. This is amazing too. Just on another subject with Leicester, the night he beat Sequenin a couple of months before this was the night that Jeff Fenech actually beat Shingaki for his first world title. To have 2 world titles, one in Sydney, one in Melbourne on the same night, just unheard of these days.
Yeah.
No, massive for boxing.
Leicester was on Channel 7 and Jeff was on Channel 9.
85 is one of our biggest years historically ever.
Yeah. So this is the last round. And look at him still going for it.
Just on a minute to go in the final round. Could it be the last minute of Lester Ellis's reign? Well, it could be. Certainly looks like it at this stage because Michael is the one that's putting all the...
Barry's just so clever at knowing how to position inside.
Yeah, he was. I was just going to say too that Gus Mercurio refereed this fight really well as well, I thought you never really noticed him on the night, which is always a sign of a good referee.
Yeah, he's a good ref, Gus.
And there it is there.
Les knew there he had lost.
Yeah.
gives it Ellis 139, Michael 147. The new world
New world champion. No matter what you felt of Barry, though, you had to take your hat off to him, didn't you?
Yeah, great effort.
Yeah, so the scorecards on the night was 145 to 140 for Barry, 147 to 140 for Barry, and 147 to 139 for Barry. So unanimous decision. Look, watching it, putting these highlights together, I probably had it maybe a little bit closer than that. I think maybe the 10 rounds to 5 or 9 rounds, probably 9 rounds to 6, whatever. But either way, just. And even more so these days, looking at it through probably more mature eyes, just the respect for Barry and that fight, and Lester for that matter. But for Barry to do what he did, come down in weight, to take on the superstar and to fight the perfect fight, you got to take your hat off to him, don't you, Pete?
You do, and I mean that's why we're talking about it. They made it happen, and they did it, and Lester was at. You could say he's a bit short of his prime, but he's a guy that was coming up to superstardom, and then you had Barry the Aging Warrior. It was just great chemistry coming into it. Obviously now we know that it wasn't right for Lester, but at the time it just seemed like, maybe because I was young, I didn't understand the game, but I thought Lester was just going to win the fight. Doing the bet with my neighbour, I thought, this is easy money. How easy is this? Not understanding the game.
And Mike, after this, so Barry only had another 4 fights after this. He defended 3 times against Jinsik Choi, Mark Fernandez, and Nahib Daho, and then obviously lost Rocky Lockridge. Lester was a little bit different, wasn't he? Because he actually had 32 fights after this, which is surprising. He went 25-7. A couple of fights after this, he lost to John Sachula. I hope I got that right, in the rematch, a 4th round KO. Had that disputed win over Tony Miller. Come back and had the great win over Dale Artengo. Stopped him in 6 rounds. But then he lost 3 out of 4 against Steve Larimore, Alberto Cortez, and Attila Fogus, who had absolutely no right ever to beat Lester Ellis. And of course, he had the 2 fights with Calvin Grave. Let's forget the Anthony Mundine thing. But do you think this fight hindered what Lester could have been? Because, let's face it, he had all the ability in the world. Do you think this sort of hindered his career, or do you think maybe he just got the most out of himself after this one?
I definitely think it hindered him somewhat. I think that had he not fought Barry, you guys know yourself, Pete, you were unbeaten in your career as an amateur, but you've been on the end of defeats as a promoter. Lyndon, you know how it feels.
Yeah.
You compete at the games, you've been Com Games, the biggest tournaments of the World Championships. When you lose, it takes a piece of you.
Yeah.
And I think that Lester was a kid that he had fueled his animosity from the abandonment of his mother as a kid into becoming a world champion, and boxing was his outlet. And I think that he probably wasn't at that position in his life that he was mentally ready to lose as a pro. I think that a couple more years later, he might have been able to handle it a bit better. If you look after this fight, he fights Marvin Garris, was listless, and then 2 weeks after that fights Sachula and gets stopped in 4 rounds, like you said, and retired again. And then had a break, thought about it, decided he wanted to box, and had probably the most impressive 3-year run of his career after, in which he was ranked number 1 in the WBC at 135, and he's ranked number 1 in the WBC at 140. He had fights with Julio Cesar Chavez, with Roger Mayweather, with Hector Camacho, with Edwin Rosario, all fall through. And it's a shame, because I think if he secured one of those opportunities, we might have remembered him for giving it a shake on the biggest stage, rather than just fading out and losing to guys like Steve Larimore. And I feel like Lester almost had a mini comeback in a loss when he fought Calvin Grove for the first time. Post-Grove stopping Fennick, Lester pushing him to a majority decision loss. To me, that was a victory. That was proof that Lester wasn't that far removed from being anywhere near his best. But I think that he's one of those guys. There's some fighters, Barry Michael probably through his career was very, very consistent behavior, consistent in form line. Lester, it really depended which version of him you caught on the day or in camp. And he was erratic. And I think that if he had a couple more years, as world champion to build and develop and build the right team around him, I think that he would have achieved a lot more. And it's crazy when you say that a guy was a world champion and later was ranked number 1 in the BC 2 weight classes, won another 4 lesser world titles, 3 IBO, 1 WBF from memory. It's crazy when you say that guy underachieved, but I feel like he did underachieve.
Yeah, I tend to agree, Pete, because he had all the ability in the world. And even looking at that, lightning fast. He could punch head and body. It was just a great fighter even at 19 or 20 years of age. But Do you think in this day and age it would have worked out a little bit different for Leicester, because he probably would have he would have got that team around him. He would have been developed. He would have got a bit of money probably behind him and sort of developed him a little bit more. So back in the day, maybe I think when you said before that was probably an inexperienced team around him, promoters and managers and everyone else, that maybe he wasn't quite ready. But these days, you might have a No Limit or a D&L behind him and a bit of money and sponsorship, and it might have been a bit more suited to progress and get the most out of his career.
Look, I don't know how to put it, because Leicester's got a lot of energy. Mike knows the family so well, and he, you know, if you meet Leicester, he's always got electricity in his body. He's got ideas, bang, bang, bang. And imagine Leicester be going, I want to fight next week. Yeah. Get me a fight. Get me 15 rounds. And these young blokes would have just been going, okay, Leicester wants to fight. We've got to book a fighting, where sometimes it's better to say we have a break, especially the loss that hurt Leicester the most was the second loss to Sakula, that fourth round, because it was like I'm going backwards now.
Yeah.
I beat this guy just before winning a world title. Now I'm getting stopped in 4 rounds. So this guy, I'm retiring. It kind of came crushing down. The whole thing came crushing down with that. And then I'm, announcing his retirement. I remember as a kid thinking, what the hell just happened here? It was just a moment ago this guy's going to take over the sport. Now he's got beat to Sakula. I mean, what's going on? I didn't understand the game. It was just devastating even as a kid. But now looking back, we can see what was happening. I mean, someone need to tell Leicester, especially after the Barry loss, we'll take 6 months off, we'll work on some stuff, you're going to come back, we're going to build it up slowly, and there's certain areas we need to work on, and you need to grow as a person, grow your physique. You're still a boy, you need to strengthen up a bit more and do some conditioning, whatever it would have taken, instead of, bang, they were just going back to back through fights, and then run into a Sakula that was throwing bombs, and Leicester's mind wasn't in it because he'd probably had that much activity that year. There was no lull moments. And then we kind of saw glimpses after that of where Leicester was, but we never got to see where Leicester should have been. And he lost that spark. And he just never got that spark back. And Fennick did the same thing with Azuma Nelson after that draw. It's funny with fighters. Some fighters, like a Manny Pacquiao, he'll get knocked out. Manny will get knocked out and he'll go, I got knocked out, that's it. Okay, I'll have a break. And then his next fight, I'm the best, I'm smiling. It doesn't affect him. I don't care if I win, I'm going to do my best. It does. Some fighters get knocked out, that's it. It's the end of their career. They want to retire. They want to commit suicide. They don't want to know about anything. Some take it real bad. Some don't. And Leicester's the type of guy, he was chasing that loss. You could see that a mile away. They were chasing that loss from Barry, and they just want to keep fighting to forget about it. And then eventually, bang, Sakula, KO loss, first KO loss, not only a points loss, KO loss, and my whole world's been caved in. What do I do now? I'm retiring. And it's just one of those things that's part of the sport that we don't like as fans, because we knew where Leicester really deserved to be. I mean, Leicester could have gone down as one of our great, potentially, even I've spoken to people who've seen him fight at 13 and 14. He was another level, and he was a Ferrari really, and the people around him just didn't have the experience to be able to harness him and get him to the places he needed to get to, because professional boxing, especially once you get to that world-class level, one mistake, it's like a pack of cards comes tumbling down. You can't, it's not like tennis, you go to another venue and you start again. With boxing, you cop a loss, it takes 2 years to get back. Mike knows that with his fighters. I mean, one of your fighters cops a loss, you lose his ranking, you lose this, you've got to get back to square one again.
Yeah, and Mike, it's a real shame though, even as closure, and you hit it on the head before, that whether it's amateur or pro or whatever, that it does take a little bit of you, and it really does. But do you think for Leicester's, I suppose, peace of mind, that rematch would have, win or lose, would have been a real benefit to him sort of going forward? Because a bit of the Rocky and Clubber Lang thing, I suppose, doesn't matter whether you win or lose, you've just got to do it for you. And do you think it would have done a lot better for him to actually get that fight?
Yeah, I think to an extent. I think for a period of time, maybe 86, like 1986, 87, definitely. I think once he got to like 88 onwards, I think he'd been able to move past it. So it's hard to tell with hypotheticals sometimes. I think that one of the other things that I didn't note before that I think played a part in Leicester's life, which you can't discount, he got married from memory in 1988. And you got to think that this is a kid that was, like I said, he was fueled by the hatred he felt from the abandonment of his mother. So
angry fighter,
he was always fighting for acceptance, which is why you've seen early career, knock a guy down, he'd punch him when he's on the canvas. It was like getting that hatred out of his system. And I think that, you know, as they say in Rocky, once he got civilized, I think it took a bit of an edge off him as well.
Yeah.
And but it's all hypotheticals. He still had a great career. And before we go, I did want to show the program.
Got to see the program.
So this is a program.
Yeah.
I want to. You don't see
Pretty
this.
good nick, Mike. It's in great nick as well.
It is.
Have you
Have a
put
look
plastic around it and all that?
The Camel cigarettes.
Oh,
Primary
the
Camel cigarettes. And look, back cover.
Oh, the Winfield
the
as well.
Winfields.
Just crazy.
Yeah, this has been well preserved. This was actually given to me a couple of years ago, but it's been taken exceptionally good care of. So I'm thinking of framing it.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I think you better put it in somewhere where we don't get. That needs to be protected.
Yeah, put it in some plastic bag and hide it, I think, mate, because there wouldn't be many of those around. But what a fight it was, and the memories we've got of that fight, and and it's even good. We've all had different relationships over the years with Barry and Lester, and to actually know the guys, probably know Barry a bit more than Lester, but to get some of those inside stories behind the event. And who knows, it would have been great to actually get both of them on to actually have a chat. Maybe we can do that another time, but we might have to get the checkbook out for that one because Barry's a businessman, so we'll see how we go. But look, great memories, and I think these types of fights sort of bring back some great memories from the day. And as I said before, pre-Mundine Green and Horn Zoo and all the other Aussie fights, this was the hottest ticket in town for all Aussie fight fans. So little bit of extended version tonight, but thanks for joining in, guys. It was really great to go over it again, and maybe hopefully one day we'll get some of those days back with the way boxing was back then.
Thanks, Lyndon. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Mike.